Typically this time, we do the Council Roundup, brought to you by Head West Subs. When you want a great sub, you've got to Head West. Their downtown location open for lunch, also open for lunch for Saturdays, and don't forget about delivery, Head West Subs. Now, all hour, we have not had the Council Roundup because there wasn't a typical City Council meeting or Committee of the Whole meeting last night. It was a special meeting dealing with the budget. And yes, it's important you know how your tax dollars are being used. Yes, even you who don't live in Springfield, you spend money in Springfield, you take your wife out to dinner in Springfield, you go shopping in Springfield, you're spending tax money in Springfield, so how are those dollars going to be spent? Of course, we will be talking a lot more in some detail about that as they start finalizing the plans, but right now they're just doing some overviews. And with a bit of an overview, just in time for the Council Roundup, is Budget Director Bill McCarty. He joins us now in studio. Director, thanks for taking time as always, and what time did you get out of there last night?
Good morning, Greg. You know, it wasn't too bad last night. We did the overview and then the elected officials. And the elected officials, when they give their presentations, they're normally pretty short. I think I was out of there, started at 5:30. I think I was out by 7:30. So not too bad. The other ones will be longer, I think.
Well, great. Thanks.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, those are the departments that are out there providing services like Public Works, Police, Fire, the utility. There's always a lot of questions surrounding those departments, so those will take a little longer. The electeds, they sort of let each other skate, don't ask a lot of questions, and then they, you know, so. And also it helps when you're in a year like we're in right now. It's sort of unprecedented for us. It's the biggest budget we've ever had. We're in the best financial condition we've ever been in, and for someone like you, I mentioned to you off air, it's really interesting that you're interviewing me about this because you've been interviewing me in the 12 years that I've been at the city. Right. You've seen the lows, and there have been some low lows.
I've seen the lows, I've seen the highs, I've seen the COVID. I've seen it all, and it's pretty remarkable. I mean, you span over two different administrations. You were with the Houston administration, now you're with the Langfelder administration. I think that in itself is somewhat of a testament of your handling of the budget situation and your ability to take a look at these numbers and respond to constituents, including elected officials. But let's get into it. You said it's the largest spending plan in city history. By how much, and what is that overall number that you're proposing?
And we're going to focus on the corporate fund here just to keep it simplistic. That's the fund that pays, that's our general fund. It pays for police, pays for fire, public works, the things that people are most associate with city services, you know, the things they care the most about. We're not going to get into the other 40-plus funds, but so let's just keep it focused on that. And yes, it is. We have a budget this year of $195 million. That is what has been proposed. Now, in a typical year, say pre-pandemic, the budget was around $130 million. Whoa, just to give you an idea of the differential between what we've introduced here versus what it normally is.
I mean, that's a 30. How much was the difference? 130 versus 190?
Pre-pandemic is 130. If you take that normal 130, what we call a maintenance or status quo budget, this year that portion's about 142. So there is obviously some growth from year to year with salaries and everything else, especially when you consider people, personal services, and benefits are normally about inflation, 8% drive that budget.
Just inflation itself, I would imagine.
Inflation, you have some of that on top of it, obviously, as well. So, yeah, you're 100% correct about that. But a lot of it is really the federal stimulus that has happened. It is not just directly to the city. You know, we got $33.8 million in ARPA funds. So 20-some million of that 195 is that federal ARPA, those federal ARPA dollars. The other thing is you have the federal stimulus into the economy, Greg, and for someone like you who's been around talking to me about this stuff for 12 years now, you understand sales tax and income taxes are two of our biggest sources. Well, think about what the federal government did. They infused all this money into the pockets of the consumer, and they went out and they spent it, especially since they couldn't travel or do anything else. They just went out and started buying stuff, and they've continued to do that over the last couple of years. So we saw a pretty significant influx of extra sales tax dollars coming in from that happening. We also saw extra income tax coming in because things like even increase in unemployment. I know a lot of people don't know it, but unemployment's taxable.
It is.
So when you increase it by 25 or 50%, guess what? Your income tax goes up too. So we've been fortunate to have that. Then the third rung of that ladder is the simple fact that, as you know, we inherited, I say we, myself and Mayor Houston, like you said, was my first boss, and now Mayor Langfelder. We all inherited quite a mess after the Great Recession. The city was broke. And just to give you some numbers, and I know that we focused on these over the years, so I think you can appreciate these numbers. So in 2010, which is about the worst of the Great Recession or right after it, we had end-of-year cash, okay, that's the money in our bank account, right, at the end of the year on the last day. It was negative $9.7 million on the last day of the year in 2010.
I do remember.
You remember that? Remember
that's
us
when I
talking about
started.
that?
I remember because the council roundup, and I still do this with the treasurer's report. We air it just to kind of give a sense of where we're at. And I do like how Treasurer Busher separates the ARPA dollars that are still on hand, which we'll talk about in a bit. But even back then, 12 years ago, when I started doing the council roundup, it was always fascinating to hear the negative cash balance and hearing it change from week to week, from month to month. And then eventually it became, a positive cash balance. And then all of a sudden it turns into we've got the highest cash balance we've ever had in the city's history. So, yeah, it's been an interesting arc there.
Right. And, going from negative 9.7, and I remember you and Ray, when he was here, always asking me, how the heck do you have negative cash? How do you operate? Well, the answer is you passively borrow from other funds that are sharing the same bank account. And that's what the city was doing. In 2010, we had that negative 9.7. The average daily balance that year, which is the average amount in the bank every single working day, was negative 4.1. We had 209 days of negative cash out of about 260 working days in 2010. And our fund balance, which is basically our reserves, that was only $2.6 million. Fast forward to this year, that end-of-year cash has gone from negative 9.7 million to a positive 42 million. Expected at the end of the year.
What?
Our average daily balance has gone from a negative 4.1 million to a positive expected $38 million on average every day. And this doesn't include ARPA dollars, by the way. I want to make that clear. Wow. That does not include. And that fund balance, the all-important fund balance, which is the key metric for the city and its financial health, we've gone from $2.6 million in 2010 to an expected almost $60 million at the end of the current fiscal year. And we've done that how? Well, we got some of the federal stimulus. There's no doubt about that. But we've been cutting costs. Our headcount has gone down over 300 positions since 2010. We've consolidated city functions. You and I have talked, I think, many times about the garage consolidation, which continues to really be the gold standard in our consolidation and functional operational improvements. Because if you think about it, we went from 5 different garages with 4 different groups, union groups in different locations, management, redundant parts rooms, all of that. We're down to 1 operation. We've gone down from 50 people to 23, 1 management, 1 parts room, 1 building. We are saving over $3 million alone just on that 1 functional consolidation. And we've been doing that in other areas as well. Those types of things, that fiscal discipline, along with, as we've talked about before, having to get just a little more tougher with our wage increases, trying to keep those under control and things like that, more in line with CPI. Those things combined, that fiscal discipline has saved a lot of money over the years. It's now put us in this position where this year everything's come together so that we can do things that we've needed to do for a long, long time. In some cases, decades, like build badly needed firehouses. And
the firehouses, the infrastructure,
equipment is
things that
one.
People drive over every day. Yeah, keeping equipment up to date. And Bill McCarty joining us is the City of Springfield Budget Director. You've seen it all. You've seen the negative cash balances. You've seen the state's not paying its bills for 2.5 years.
2018.
The budget impasse.
Yes, that was tough.
You've experienced the pandemic, then the flush of cash from the federal government and how to manage that. So a lot of change you've experienced over the time. I do want to talk just briefly, though, about the driving factors of employment costs. But something that people don't necessarily drive over every day and see every day is that pension debt.
Yes.
What's the plan with that, and how are we doing on the unfunded liability? And is it possible to take some of that reserves that you now have on hand and throw like one-time lump payments just to try to get that under control?
Well, Greg, actually this budget has that. Last year's budget, the current year we're in right now, we added a couple of extra $1 million in pension payments. The budget that's been proposed has another $1 million per pension fund, police and fire. And then on top of that, the city council and the mayor instituted a few years ago a couple of automatic mechanisms to put extra money into the pensions. One is half of the 3% cannabis sales tax goes to those pension obligations. The other thing is anytime our fund balance finishes over 20%, a 0.25% of the pilot payment we get from the utility, which is about $600,000, give or take, also goes into those pension funds. So all in, this coming year, we will end up putting in an extra $3 million into the pension funds over and above the required contributions that we have to make. And you are absolutely right. We've been talking about pension from day one. That is the single, I said it last night at the hearing, that is the single biggest driver of our expense and concern now and into the future. I always do in the hearing this chart that kind of shows the ramp, and I don't know if your viewers can see that or not.
Hold that up. Yeah, sure.
Anyway, this always is my last slide before the summary.
keep holding that up.
So if you see that, I've got some stuff written on it. But the bottom line is, in that 8 there that you see, that is the extra total the pension payments. That's this red area this year. So if you look at the red area, it shows that we have to average $16.7 million over property taxes. So our property tax estimates are the blue.
Yeah.
The red is what we are going to have to put in over that. And these numbers are all updated. And that means we have to take from other areas to do that. We have to take income tax. We have to take sales tax, stuff that funds police, stuff that's funds public works and fire. We have to take from that area, and that's the big concern, is we're going to be sacrificing potentially or cannibalizing city services just to make our required pension payments.
Now, this is all the time we've got, but what can the State House do? They've, of course, got their new session starting. Can the State House do anything to help alleviate some of this?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things the State House can do. Number one, they could lower the funding requirement from 90% to, say, 80%. That has been proposed a couple of times. It hasn't gone anywhere. Back in 2011, when the state did Tier 2, they did lower the percentage of funding requirement from 100 to 90, because you're never going to need that much. Nobody's ever going to retire all at the same time. So it's really silly to have that kind of funding sitting there when you can be funding operations.
I will say, though, fiduciary experts that I've seen report elsewhere say 90% is not the threshold. It needs to be 100%.
Well, the accountants will tell you that. They absolutely will. I've got accountants at work that tell me that. And I just tell them that, well, I've got to fund police, I've got to fund fire, I've got to fund public works. People want their streets. They'd rather have money going towards being protected and having their streets paved and sidewalks done rather than employee benefits. But it's important we do both. That's what's key, is we have to find a way to do both, and that's what we've been doing at the city. The other thing the state can do, Greg, is there has been talk, and there's actually a little more legs to it, potentially extending the ramp out. Now, as I said last night at the meeting, if the state does that, that could theoretically lower our payments right now. We'll pay more in the long run. My recommendation to council and the mayor would be to keep flat at the very least where we're at, the level we're at now, even though we could pay millions less, so that we can flatten that curve, get it paid down more quickly, pay less interest. It's kind of like having a 30-year mortgage, but paying on it like it's a 20-year mortgage. That would be my recommendation. That would go a long way into alleviating the pressure that we have at the city of Springfield and pensions.
Budget Director Bill McCarty, always a pleasure talking with you, and we'll talk about the budget some more as the pieces start coming together, and we'll also talk about the election in April as well. And just a note, you are running for treasurer. We're not going to talk about that now, but we will talk about that in the future. Greatly appreciated as always. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it.
Yep. Springfield's Morning News on WMAY. Not the council roundup, but still got some council action in there. It's now 7:54 from Culver's West on Wabash.
It's time to apply at Culver's West on Wabash. We're hiring all positions.